Our first company for today is BPH Energy, trading under the ASX code BPH with a market cap of 27 million. They are a diversified company holding investments in biotechnology and resources. BPH holds a significant interest, 36%, in unlisted oil and gas exploration company Advent Energy Limited. Joining us today is BPH MD and Executive Director David Breeze. Welcome back, David, and over to you.
Thank you, Paul. I'm going to speak today on the three entities in which we have significant investment: Advent Energy, Clean Hydrogen Technologies, and Cortical Dynamics. I'll speak mostly about Advent Energy, and thank you for the opportunity to present. If we can go to the next slide, please. In October of last year, Minister King, the Resources Minister, initiated an inquiry into the future gas strategy for Australia. Australia is actually in the midst of an energy supply crisis, and that's best illustrated by these developments just in the last couple of months. As you see, the Australian editorial said that gas is critical to keeping lights on, and whilst the government has done a deal with certain suppliers to keep power stations going for the next 5 years, Bass Strait is in the middle of a 50% reduction in gas supply, and that's occurring over last year, year before, and through this year and through into the next couple of years. Bass Strait has supplied all of the gas that has been needed for Eastern Australia for the demand purposes for the last 60 years, and has used 6 TCF to do so. But in a 50% reduction of supply capacity, that's a problem. Now we're seeing the energy issues that the grid's on a knife edge. We had in December households asked to reduce electricity usage. In January, we had the same energy market operator request to moderate demand. In Queensland, we had a gas interruption in Northern Territory, and households were blacked out. And then we had blackouts in Victoria. And in 2022, of course, we had a major blackout, and they had to actually control demand of gas in Victoria. Next slide, please. The AEMO, which is the Australian Energy Market Operator, has put out a draft integrated system plan. There's a really important point within that, and that is that they now predict that there will be 16 gigawatts of gas-fired power required by 2050. Last year, they said it was 11 gigawatts of gas-fired power by 2050, and we're already using 10 to 11 gigawatts of gas-fired power at the moment. In other words, the need for gas in the system isn't going to go away. If I can go to the next slide, please. When DESA put out the consultation paper, they forecast that there would be an 800 petajoule a year shortfall out to 2034. However, that shortfall starts to kick in from 2026-27 and grows substantially. I'm about to go to the next slide, and when I do that, I'm going to give you context to that demand and supply issue. If we can go to the next slide. If you look at Tasmania, South Australia, Northern Territory, Victoria, in fact, and part of Queensland's total use, that's about 800 petajoules a year. In other words, you either shut off all domestic supply, or you supply the external contracts where Australia supplies up to 40% of Japanese LNG power requirements. And you can't have that type of energy constraint onto the major international companies countries, which includes, of course, Singapore, South Korea, Japan, and they significantly have emphasised the risk in terms of Australia's reputation in terms of shutting off that supply. So new supply is critical. If I can go to the next slide, please. There is not sources in the international LNG. In fact, if you look at the red line, the supply won't meet the international demand either. So now I'll go to the next slide. When I talked about the Northern Territory gas supply issue, they had to shut down the pipeline that took gas from the Northern Territory and into the eastern states. And that has occurred again in the recent past. In fact, a business has now gone out of producing helium in the Northern Territory, and that's one of at least 3 or 4 businesses that have shut down or had to change their production processes. And that includes Molycop in Newcastle, Sealy, which has just announced closure, a factory closure in northern Victoria, and Orica, which has just announced that they're going to the USA for a new project because they can't get the gas that they require within the Australian market system to be able to supply them. Now, they're all broad issues, and that takes us to the importance of PEP 11. Next slide, please. So there are only 2 permits in New South Wales that are capable of meeting the further supply of gas. And other than that, New South Wales has no other sources of domestic supply. And of course, Queensland is very largely committed to those LNG exports. Next slide, please. So 5.7 TCF in targets, in structural targets, 26 kilometres off Newcastle, new gas-fired power stations going into New South Wales. Next slide, please. This is a gas project. It's a gas project because the vitrinite maturity, as illustrated in this slide, is such that only gas is really capable of being produced out of this area. And that's a critical point in terms of people who are attempting to mislead the public by saying it's an oil project. It's not, it's gas. Next slide, please. The structural target is at 2,000 metres and it's about 20 square kilometres. It's a significant target. That alone could in fact meet a significant requirement of New South Wales in the success case. Next slide, please. So not only is it potentially able to be used for gas supply, but also for carbon capture and storage, but also in the investment that we have, and I'm about to speak briefly about in hydrogen, has the capacity to actually produce both hydrogen and carbon into the domestic supply situation. So next slide, please. I move to clean hydrogen technologies, and we made an announcement in the last week or so. We're in an investment which is now producing turquoise hydrogen and clean carbon black. It has no other CO2 emissions within it. And the clean carbon black is what I'm going to stress in this next couple of moments. Next slide, please. That announcement showed that they've gone from proof of concept to production, and it's low level of production at the moment. But here's the key to understanding the value enhancement here. We're producing carbon nanotubes and alumina as a composite. And the mechanical properties is that it's a toughening agent, it's a high tensile strength, conductivity greater than copper, and a thermal dissipation greater than diamonds. It resists corrosion and fatigue. It can be used in batteries, it can be used in military applications, in plastics, in paints. So it has a very wide degree of knowledge, and that's because of the unique features of the product that we're producing. Next slide, please. And this is the final slide bar the disclaimer. Cortical Dynamics has moved through FDA. We're at the moment in the process of having our Gen 2 upgraded. We already have Gen 1, that is the software, hardware, firmware, and screens approved in both FDA, CE, TGA, and the Korean marketplace. And we're in the process of having the enhancements or the move through into Generation 2 now upgraded for supply into those marketplaces. I'll finish at that point because I think I've used up my allotted 10 minutes and move to question time. Thanks very much.
David, that's lovely. Thank you very much. Bang on time, much appreciated. And actually, there's a few questions around the Hydrogen Corp. So the first one up, you now own 10% of Clean Energy, Clean Hydrogen Corp, and you also have the ability to acquire another further 10%. What is the company's strategy going forward with this investment?
So we actually have an equity interest in 19.5% across both BPH and Advent. We have already signed and announced the potential to use that gas to produce both hydrogen and this carbon composite in the Northern Territory with our project up there. And of course, energy is a key requirement in the area where we are, up in the Northern Territory. But we have the potential to be able to use that technology in the New South Wales area. And of course, hydrogen is a key component of the energy transition moving forward. Now, not only that, of course, we have the capacity to get a substantial value uplift because hydrogen, of course, is needed, and the market in this is significant across the globe. It's a multi-billion-dollar marketplace. Next question, please.
And next one is on the same sort of topic. Is there a timeline for Clean Energy to build, test, and produce from the reactor as yet?
Yes. So, in fact, their initial system, they've just outgrown their current plant area. That is in terms of both footprint and vertical height, because as you move up in production capacity, your system gets taller and you move from something like 4 meters up to 7 meters. So we're in the process of identifying and moving to a new site there. And we have an objective of moving into that scaled up production within this year.
And one just come in here, could you comment on the medical technology side of the business and how does that fit into the portfolio?
And again, we have just under a 20% interest in that entity. And of course, medtech acquisitions occur on a global basis as these companies that have developed technologies, and they do take time, but the medtech acquisitions occur. However, we have already got an agreement with Philips, and Philips have their screens in over 50% of the operating theatres on a global basis. The advantage of that for us is that we only need to be able to supply then the sensors and the software and the firmware, and the screen that we utilise there is the Philips screen, and the screen is the most significant portion of the acquisition cost for hospitals. So we have the capacity to move both in that low-cost penetration of markets, as well as where the Philips screen isn't in the approximate 50% of theatres around the world. And you can see that in the strategy that we've just enunciated there.
Okay, and just to finish up, as of today, what is the status with PEP 11 offshore New South Wales? Both the state government and Commonwealth have a position on this. What do you expect to be the outcome?
So we've already made several releases on this, and we don't have an update beyond that. We do know that NOPTA made a recommendation to the Joint Authority in October of last year. That recommendation, again, we know from public statements by Minister King, is with the departments that she administers, and we are currently waiting for the Joint Authority to sign off on the NOPTA recommendation.
David, as always, absolute pleasure. Many thanks for taking part today.
Thanks indeed.